Well, I'm delighted to welcome my regular guest back today, Marcel Salazar. Marcel, how are you?
Hello, thank you so much for having me again. I am actually very well, surviving the quite chilly weather at the moment. Can't complain though, the sun's out.
It's a bit fresh, isn't it?
It's very fresh. It's very fresh. And I'm riding a motorbike as well at the moment, so I really feel it when I get up to a certain speed.
I can imagine, yes. You're going to
Yes,
have gloves and thermals and a lot on in this weather,
I-
yeah.
I've got that. I've got my thick jacket on, I've got my undercoat on, I've got my gloves on, and it's pretty bitey. It's bitey, but
Right.
it's good. I can't complain.
Okay, Marcel, you're going to be talking to us today about stretching.
Correct.
And could this really sort us out? What is the whole principle behind
Yeah,
stretching?
yeah. So this is a concept that everyone kind of knows we should do, but about 80% of us don't. Okay, that's the reality of it. I think we're all taught. The good thing is we've all been taught from school to sort of consider stretching, to do stretching. There's a little bit of confusion about when to do it, when's the best time, and then also, of course, how to do it. So, of course, what ways are there to do it? When should you do these in the day? What's best for who and when? So I wanted to try and address this because in my day-to-day work, I basically recommend stretching all the time. And I
Right.
usually recommend stretching to people 8 times out of 10 if they've come in for any form of treatment, whether it be for tight muscles or a structural issue or back pain or a joint pain of some description. I very often find that there's a connection, not a cause always, sometimes it is, but there's a connection between tight muscles, lack of range, that's causing or contributing to their problem. So, yeah, stretching can make a huge difference.
Right. Okay. And what is it that happens in our body when we stretch?
Yeah.
What is the principle behind this?
Yeah. So, perhaps if I list the benefits of stretching, and then I'll sort of go into a bit more detail of each one, and then we'll sort of know the details of each part of that. So, fundamentally, as you would imagine, stretching increases your flexibility. Okay, and flexibility effectively means your
Mm.
ability to move through a certain range of motion. So that then is the second benefit, which is increase of range of motion, which is the movements that you're able to make in your day-to-day life shouldn't be restricted by tight
Mm.
muscles or tight joints. Then we know it can improve performance for physical activity, ranging from walking to sex to physical exercise and sport. So all these different things. It definitely, because when your muscles become tight or they become restricted, and I will go into more detail about that. Improves posture because it does play a big role, of course, in how you hold yourself and
Right.
which muscles are working when you're in an upright position. We know that it improves and helps to prevent back pain, and it can even improve the pain that you may be experiencing. So if you do have back pain, sometimes simply stretching is indicative to avoid or improve or get rid of that pain, which is a massive bonus when you can make that happen. And finding that solution through stretching is really powerful. We know because it does increase your heart rate to do certain forms of stretching, that it can be a great stress reliever as well, because you do focus more on your breathing when you stretch, and that translates really positively to your stress levels. It can help to calm your mind as well. So obviously, as a result of less stress, you feel calmer in yourself, particularly having completed it. And then it's also been found to be very effective for tension. So, for example, people find they have a lot of tension in their upper back, neck, and
Yeah.
shoulders. That can lead to tension headaches, which of course can also be massively improved by stretching out certain parts of your
Right.
body. So those are just nine of the. There are more, for sure, but those are just nine of the major benefits of stretching on a regular basis.
Right. And what is happening in our bodies that actually means that we need to do this? I mean,
Yeah,
isn't our day-to-day activities and movement going to be enough
yeah.
to keep our muscles working well? What is actually happening? that
So
we need.
when you move, of course, all movement is created by contraction of the muscle. So contraction of the muscle is shortening and then lengthening of that muscle.
Right.
Now, confusing because very often lengthening would mean that you're kind of elongating a muscle in this case. So let's think about a simple muscle like the bicep muscle. Okay, so when you bend your arm, your bicep muscle pops up and it's contracting in the middle there because that's the muscly part that will pull together to contract, and the muscle becomes tendons, and the tendons pull on the bones, or in this case the joint of the elbow, which causes a movement.
Right.
Without muscles, you have no movement whatsoever. So the muscles are fundamental. So when we're walking, we're contracting the muscles in our lower body and our legs. And what's happening is that each one of those muscles is working in unison, alternately. Let's say the quads, the glutes, the hamstrings are working in a pattern of contracting and relaxing, contracting and relaxing. Yeah. So as we age, or if we're very physically active, we are contracting and relaxing the muscles, but they don't relax very well after a certain age, or if we've really pushed our muscles particularly hard. So as we age, our body's ability to recover, or in this case, relax, is limited.
Right.
So then the muscle stays contracted and tight, and over time, this begins to reduce your range of motion. So in this case, let's go back to using the arm example. If I'm using my bicep a lot and I'm not straightening my arm enough to maintain my full range of motion, I'm going to end up being stuck with a bent arm, and that will be as far as I can go.
Right. Okay.
So that example is obviously better referenced in other parts of the body, maybe the quadriceps or your lower back or your abdominals. If they all become too tight, they pull on the joint that they're attached to, and they start to reduce the range of motion that joint can manage. And so what's happening is that the muscle becomes tighter, blood flow is restricted, and the tendons at the either end of the muscle also will become stiffer and less mobile, less flexible.
Right. So is this just an age thing, Marcel? Oh, sorry, we're coming and going a little bit, but is this predominantly an age thing, or does it happen right across the ages?
It happens right across the ages, but it increases the older we become.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, it gets worse, and our body's ability to relax and recover reduces as we age. But there are absolutely ways that you can limit that decrease in recovery and decrease in flexibility, and that is, of course, by utilizing the muscles and by stretching the muscles.
Yeah. Now, are we talking sort of exercise here or exercises to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is absolutely both. So the best way to stretch is to exercise beforehand.
Okay.
So what was very much taught at school, and I was taught this too, which was that you would stretch before exercise.
Right.
And I think anyone listening to this would agree that yes, you normally are told to stretch before you exercise. Now, you can do that, but there was quite a lot of research to show that actually doing too much stretching, so holding on to a stretch before you've started to use any given muscle, is actually detrimental, particularly to intense or moderate level exercise.
Right.
And if you do that, then you're effectively preparing the muscles to be stretched. So in a basic format, let's say I wanted to stretch the muscles at the front of my thighs, which are the quadriceps, then what I would ideally want to do is go for a 5-minute walk. If I do a 5-minute walk, that's going to prepare the muscles at the front of my legs. That's not the only thing you can do. You could climb a set of stairs, maybe go up a flight of 10 stairs 3 times, and that will prepare the muscles at the front of your leg. It will prepare other muscles as well, but it will prepare muscles at the front of your leg. And then you could look to stretch. So I always recommend that if most of my clients go for walks, which is important because walking regularly is very important. When you finished walking, stretch. So before you get in your car, try to stretch, for example, the quadricep muscles. Excuse me. So that's very, very important. If you can stretch the quadricep muscles, that will make a big difference to how relaxed they will be and potentially reduce the likelihood of sore muscles.
Right. Yeah, but you know, if I recall, you know, when I was in my fit and healthy days, we used to do cross country running and things like that. And all they really sort of encouraged was, you know, stretch before you start running. There
Right.
was nothing about warming the muscles up first. It was just like, right, stretch them like this, right, off you go.
Yeah. And that's it. That was exactly it. That was the old school way. And you would see that people would be giving it all of this and leaning over and touching
Yeah,
toes, etc. But what we've learned is that actually doing too much stretching before you exercise can be detrimental to the muscle. So that is counterproductive before. Now, you can do a little bit of stretching. What I mean by a little bit of stretching is you can do the same type of stretches that you do at the end of exercising at the beginning, but just for less time. So you might hold it for
right,
5 to 6 seconds and then doing the activity that you're going to undertake. In this case, distance running. If you wanted to warm up for distance running, you go for a jog for 5 minutes. And then you might
right,
stretch a little bit. You to undertake the main.
right.
So that's preparation. So there's a warm up. What I mean is quick stretch in terms of duration, and then going into the main event. And the duration of hold wants to be between 15 and 20 seconds. That's the sweet spot.
Okay, 15 to 20 seconds.
15 to 20 seconds, exactly. If we can hold that position for 15 to 20 seconds, that is a sweet spot. But it's very important to know there are actually about 8 different forms of stretching. So I've told you the benefits of stretching. What I haven't yet told you are the techniques of stretching. So
Yeah,
there are 6 different types of stretching by name. So the
right.
different types of stretching or the different techniques are dynamic, static, ballistic, PNF, passive, and active stretching.
Right. Okay. I'm impressed. And don't ask me to repeat that because
No,
I probably can't.
don't worry.
Right. Okay. But I know you're going to talk us through all these different forms, Marcel. But you know, you understand the structure of the muscles in the body, and you know which muscles do which and which ones work in counter to others. But most of us are pretty ignorant about this. I mean, how much do you need to know about, you know, if you have a pain, for example, how much do you need to know about the muscles to know what kind of stretching and where and how long to do?
Yeah. It is very important to know. For example, I think most people intuitively know which muscles roughly they're using when they go for a walk.
Right. Okay.
So if you know which muscles you're using, now this is where somebody like me can make a huge difference to the type of stretching. So if I told you to stretch your quad muscles or the muscles at the front of your thigh, you'd probably know in a roundabout way how to do that. But what I tend to try to do is I try to educate people on the correct technique and how to really hit the spot. And there are just tiny little minor tweaks and adjustments that you can do that will change the whole stretch and make it much more effective.
Right.
So that's one reason why coming to somebody like me is incredibly useful if you want to improve your flexibility and your ability to stretch. But in another way, for example, one of the areas within the walking category that you would want to stretch is the piriformis muscle. Now, most people, if I ask them what the piriformis is, unless they have previous experience, don't know where the
I'm,
piriformis is.
I'm sure I don't have one of those.
Right. Well, if you didn't, you would struggle with any change of direction, left or right. So you definitely have a piriformis. 2 of them, in fact. Two of them.
Okay. Okay.
So you've
But
definitely got piriformis.
it does demonstrate what I think what I was trying to say, maybe a bit clumsily,
Right.
that you know we don't always know. without maybe consulting someone like yourself,
Yeah,
what muscles do what,
yeah,
and which ones we need to exercise.
correct. And I mean, it really highlights the point that you really should try to educate yourself and be honest with yourself. If you want to stretch but you don't know how to stretch, learn how to stretch. And if you want to learn how to stretch, get guidance from somebody who can actually help.
What would you like to do? Do you want to talk us through the different types of stretching,
Yeah,
and what they are, what purpose or what benefit they serve, and maybe even when we should be doing these things?
yeah, yeah. So let's talk about the most basic one. So the one I've mentioned probably the most is the static stretch. So the static
Okay,
stretch is the one where you, again, stretching the quadricep muscles. If we were to stand holding onto a bench or a fence or a door, and we were to aim to pull the foot towards the buttock. So we bend at the knee, grab our foot if we can, and bring the heel to the backside. That is a static stretch
right,
that would stretch out the quadricep muscle. Now, what I recommend to my clients is to ensure three things. One, that the knees are in alignment. So your knees shouldn't be very far apart, and one shouldn't be in front or behind the other. It's just that the standing leg and the bent knee are in alignment.
right,
Then that the hips are pushed forward. So very often, if your quads are tight, your bum will stick out backwards. So you want to push your hips forward, and then that your chest is elevated and you're standing up straight.
right.
If you do
Okay,
those three things, which is quite a lot to remember, if you do those three things, you'll stretch in a whole different way and it will really hit the spot. And some people won't be able to do it properly at all. And that's the goal to try and achieve.
right. Yeah.
So
Well,
that's a static stretch.
I know that one exactly, because that was the one that you encouraged me to do, and
Correct.
actually I still do it from time to time. I don't do it every day,
Every
but
day.
from time to time it's like, yep, I can feel something pulling here, and I do
Good.
that, and actually when you're doing it right, because
Yes.
you can feel the muscle pulling
Right.
down the front of the leg.
Yep.
And if it's very stiff, you can't get your foot right up to your buttock.
Correct. That's it. That's exactly right. And that lets you know what I try to go. Unless there's a knee problem, if you have a knee problem, that's a limiting issue, right? If you have a knee
Right,
issue that's limiting your range of motion mechanically inside the knee, that's something else. But if you don't have any knee issues, if you struggle and you feel extreme tightness in the front of that muscle, it's because that muscle is excessively tight, and that can have all forms of issues ranging from being a problem at the knee to being a problem at the hip to causing problems in your lower back because
right,
it's connected at both ends. So that's a good indicator. If you can bring your heel to your backside, some people may find they bring their heel to their backside and suddenly they get this twang in the back. And again, it shows you a connection there, you see? So
right,
it's very, very interesting, and it can be very, very effective to just improve the stretch or just implement a stretch, and suddenly the back becomes much less of a problem.
right. Okay.
Yeah. So
So
that was static stretch.
that's a
That was
static
that was
stretch,
just one of them. Yeah.
right?
So dynamic stretching is where you have an active movement in order to stretch the muscle. So in this case, let's say, for example, something simple. If we were to be in a standing position and we spread our legs wider apart and we lean to either side with our
Okay.
hips, either tilting the hips like so, like a ship, or leaning over to one side, you'll feel a pull on the inside of your thighs. And that's a
Right,
dynamic stretch. So basically, anywhere where there's a stretching feeling with movement, that's what dynamic
right,
stretching is. So it's stretching with movement, simple as that.
right. And what is the purpose of this? Is it
Yeah,
just simply generally improving the flexibility, or
yep.
would you recommend that for someone with a specific problem?
No, so that's a very good question, and that's where the differentiation of these stretchings becomes important, because dynamic stretching is best done before you exercise in order to prepare them for exercise.
Right,
So this is where there's a difference between static stretching and dynamic. Dynamic is best done before you do your main event because there's movement with stretching. So that starts
right,
to repair the muscle without providing excessive amounts of stress and without incurring the physiological response to stretching, which is what can create problems later on. Static stretching is best done after exercise in order to increase range of motion, improve recovery, and it reduces the risk of injury.
Right. Okay. And I don't know. We touched on this long time ago. I think. And am I right that in the dynamic stretching, um, this is the sort of thing that you might do before an activity, and that you would kind of almost mimic the activity you're going to be doing? Was
Correct.
that? Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if you are going to do, that's why, for example, a 5-minute walk would be a dynamic stretch warm up for a jog, or a
Right.
walk or a run. A jog would be a dynamic warm up for a run, for example.
Right.
If you're going to do a bench press or a shoulder press, you would do that movement, but with much less weight.
Of course. Yeah.
And that is a dynamic warm up for the given exercise. And that massively reduces your risk of injury, but it also, most importantly, prepares the muscle for what you're about to do.
Right. Okay. So, Marcel, we're
Yes.
going to take a short break now,
All
and
right.
then we'll come back. And after the break, what is it you're going to pick up with us?
So we're going to talk about the different varieties of, with a little bit more detail about the different varieties of stretching techniques, particularly how I can help you actually. And then we're going to talk about whether or not, there are some exercises and stretches to be avoided, but I don't
Right.
want to overwhelm our listeners. So we'll keep it as straightforward and as simple as we can.
Welcome back, Marcel.
Thank you.
You've got us all kind of stretching and bending over and various things from our dynamic and static stretches. What would you like to pick up on now, Marcel? What are
So
the other things?
those absolutely, those two types of stretches people can do absolutely by themselves. So once you learn the basics, the good news is you can do that by yourself.
Right.
You can learn from a professional and then you do them by yourself. And it's highly recommended that you do those. If you can do them daily, your life will change forever. So referring to the title of this whole show, if you do stretches on a daily basis, you will probably change your life. If it's the only thing exercise-wise you change, it will change your life for the better, because what it can do for your body is really tremendous, and it is
Right.
absolutely fantastic. And I dare people listening to the show, watching this on a replay or on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this, try stretching for a month every single day, and then come back to the video and put a comment and suggest in what way has it changed.
I think I could
Now,
probably
what
do
I
that.
wanted to share.
I think I could
Mhm.
probably do that better for a month than taking a cold shower for a month.
Right, there we go. There's your next challenge then. I love it. Good. I would love to hear what you would think after doing that for a month. Yeah, this is a
Yeah.
little bit easier. Both are good for you, but this might be a little bit more straightforward for you. Or you could take a cold shower after your stretching, of course. But anyway.
That sounds like a double whammy.
I've got it. I've got it all figured out. But what I do want to talk about are the other types of stretching techniques.
Okay.
Just briefly covering those, because those would be something that a professional would help you with. So ballistic stretching is slightly more explosive in the way that you do the stretch. That would basically require a little bit more. It's more of a sporting type of stretch. So it would be
Right.
one that, for example, a jumping lunge is a very ballistic type of stretch. There's a bit more effort involved with it.
Right.
There are lots more. I won't go into detail. PNF is one of my favorite stretches. PNF stands for proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. I love the words. And what that means is that's using your body's own muscles against themselves in order to create more flexibility. That you have to do in a partner. It's very difficult to do that by yourself. It's not
Okay.
impossible, but it's better to do that with a professional or somebody who knows how to do it. But that works very, very well to accelerate range of motion and muscle relaxation, which is basically what stretching is.
Right.
To explain that in a nutshell, what you're doing is you're actively using one muscle against another.
Right.
And I love it. It's very, very clever. Your body will automatically
Yeah.
relax the muscle that you're pushing against it. In this case, let's use the hamstring muscle. If the hamstring muscle is active, the quadricep muscle has to relax.
Right.
If the quadricep muscle, which is the muscle at the front of the thigh, is active, the hamstring muscle has to relax. You
Right.
can't have both of them functioning fully, or at least not easily, at the same time.
Yeah. But I think that this is something important for us to remember, or to know that basically muscles can only do two things, can't they? They can either contract or they can relax.
Correct.
And, if we relax a muscle, it requires another muscle to sort of stretch it back out again.
Exactly.
We don't have muscles don't do dynamic things on the sort of outway.
They never work in unison. They never
No.
work by themselves. That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. There's always two sets of muscles causing an action and reaction. So
Right.
exactly what you've just said is absolutely bang on. In order for my bicep to work and allow my arm to bend, I have to, my tricep muscle on the underside of my arm has to relax.
Yes.
If my bicep, in order for my arm to straighten and for my tricep to function to straighten my arm, my bicep has to relax.
Yes.
You see?
Right.
So that way
Yeah,
they
yeah,
work in symmetry, and it's
yeah.
fantastic. So if I'm pulling up this way, the biceps working, the tricep has to relax,
Just relax, yes.
and
Yeah.
vice versa to do the other thing.
Okay, I was accompanied by one of my dogs there for a moment, who has decided it's time to go out, I think. So if you give me just 1 second, I'm gonna open the door for him and let him
I
out.
thought the dog was joining the show. I'm a bit disappointed.
He was doing a bit stretching, yeah.
I saw.
Oh, I'm not even going to try to remember what PNF stands for, but we've talked about the PNF, and this is the muscles working in counter to each other, yeah?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Right.
So the PNF, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, fantastic word, or set of words,
You just like
is
saying
really
that. You
powerful.
just like
I
saying
love
that.
saying
Come
it.
on.
I love saying it. I will scream that at my clients. We're doing PNF, proprioceptive. Anyway, so yeah, I love saying it. So that's a really good one, but you do need some help. Passive stretching, which is obviously,
Right.
as the word would insinuate, would mean that you are effectively allowing somebody else to stretch you. So this would be a
Right.
partnership stretching where they are putting you through a stretch routine of some description. So
Right.
that would be, somebody helping you to bring your leg higher up. If you're lying on your back and your leg is straight up, one leg, somebody would help to push that leg back, for example. Many,
Right.
many examples of passive stretching. Passive just means somebody's kind of doing it for you and you're going through the motions. And then active stretching, very, very similar to dynamic stretching, is just where you're utilizing the muscle a little bit in order to get a little bit more range of motion. The best example I can think of, in order to stretch the hamstring muscles, the muscles at the back of the legs, you could put a weight in your hands, and if you bend forward and pivot at the hips like so, what the
Right.
weight is going to do is apply an additional load to stretch the hamstrings of your leg,
Right.
because your body basically is pulled upright or erect by your hamstrings at the back. They
Sure.
help to bring your pelvis upwards. So that would be a form of active stretching using a small weight in your hands in order to elongate the hamstring muscles or get them to actively work and stretch
Mm.
at the same time.
And what kind of weight are we talking about? I mean, in terms of how heavy? Should it be an 8 liter bottle of water, or
No, no. So this is the thing.
I,
So you can actually use your own body weight. In that example, you could actually just use your own body weight, keeping your back totally straight, pivoting at the hips and tipping forward. And it's surprising how few people can actually do that, but it is a fantastic exercise if you tip your hips forward, keeping your back totally flat and try and literally curve in the middle. You will feel your hamstrings begin to pull. If you apply an additional load in your hands, it could be anything from 1 kilo all the way up to an 8 liter bottle of water. Now, obviously, the heavier the weight, the more that's going to put effort through the
Yeah.
muscles, and it becomes more of a strength training activity. So you don't need an awful lot of weight. It can start off with your own body weight, and you can build it up.
Right. Yeah. And if, if, as you're saying that, the sort of elasticity of the muscles, becomes less as you get older, then obviously if you are elderly, this exercise might benefit you, but you don't really want to be pulling 8 kilos up. You need to be careful, I guess,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. No, I would love for people to be doing that. And it is something that you can 100% build up to, but you don't start at that point. Exactly.
right, right.
Yeah.
So,
So maybe what I'll talk about now is some of the risk factors or safety tips that I would recommend for people to be aware of.
right, good,
Yeah.
go for it.
Lovely. So some of the things to be aware of when stretching is if you have degenerative joint issues, you need to seek professional advice before you start stretching. So if you know you've got rheumatoid arthritis, if you have torn a muscle historically, if you've got scar tissue in your muscles themselves, get professional advice before you undergo any major stretching.
Right,
If you have lower back pain that is particularly acute, it might be that stretching is the best thing for you to do, but it might also be that you need to get it checked first of all before you go into doing that too aggressively. The other thing is that when you stretch, you should always stretch to where you feel a degree of stretch and a degree of discomfort. What you don't want to do is go to the point of where you feel like something is tearing. Okay, now that sounds logical, but you'd be amazed at how many people say, how hard should I actually feel this stretch? And of course,
yeah,
the more you go to reach for a certain stretch position, the more effective that's going to be. But you don't want it to go to the point where you are in sharp or acute pain because you might end up tearing something. That's much harder. I do want to stress that is quite hard to do by yourself. It's hard to tear muscles or tendons by yourself doing stretches. It's easy to do if you are exerting an awful lot of effort and your body isn't ready for it. But
right,
if your body is ready for it and you're nice and warm, there's every reason why you can stretch and you can hold a fairly uncomfortable position for 15 to 20 seconds risk of damaging something.
right.
But if you feel acute, sharp, or tearing pain, logically, you may have overdone it there a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
So it's
really,
always good to check. Now, there are some technique things in terms of the old school way as well was bouncing. I don't know whether you're familiar, but let's say people used to bounce into stretches quite a lot and they sort of
right,
bounced into the hamstrings or they're bouncing the calf muscles down and so on. It's actually contraindicated and should be avoided if you can. If
right.
you can avoid bouncing, that's better. It's better to just hold a stretch for the 15 to 20, up to 30 seconds if you want to, on the provision you can feel the stretch, it's not giving you acute or sharp pain, and you can feel the stretch is in the right place. Okay,
Yeah,
that would be what you want to do. It is hard to overstretch. Most people will not overstretch, but again, like with anything, if you spend 3 hours stretching and you're doing it an awful lot, the chances are you might do yourself a mischief, but I don't think any of our listeners are in that category.
no,
And like I said before, always be warm for when you stretch. So if you want to stretch your quads, go for a walk before or climb some stairs before and then stretch. Don't get out of bed and then stretch.
right.
That I recommend for everybody.
Yeah, I never do that. I kind of crawl out of bed and usually first visit to the loo, and then I think about proper
Yeah,
movement after that.
right. That's fair enough. That's fair enough. No, exactly. But if you can get moving about first, most people will feel looser for sure. And
Yeah,
then if you want to start stretching, that would be a great time to do it.
yeah. I think from what you're describing, and I guess most people who are listening to this will relate to this, that there is a certain pleasure in just feeling that little bit of stretch on certain muscles. But you
Definitely.
should really know it's not an exercise of masochism to see how much pain you can endure. Once you feel that sort of pull,
Yeah.
And it does feel quite good actually.
I
And
mean, this is what Pilates and yoga are born from.
right, yes,
Pilates and yoga are born from the principle of stretching. Now,
sure,
they have evolved into incorporating static holds for strength or doing certain movements for strength, incorporating equipment for strength as well. But the fundamentals of Pilates is range of motion and mobility.
right.
So Joseph Pilates created his concept whilst actually being in prison, which is quite an interesting story. Um,
That's for another
yeah,
day, I think, Marcel. Yeah.
yeah, there we go. There we go. He actually was imprisoned when he came up with his concept because he was bored. He didn't do enough. He couldn't do enough exercise, so he came up with these concepts with these positions, and then he realized he had something here that made him feel fantastic, and he formulated a system. And
Right.
that
Okay.
system not only kept his mind, his body in great condition, but it allowed him to remain flexible and his joints supple and healthy. So, regardless of his location, he made it work.
Yeah.
And it's now, a global thing. So, it was a good idea that he put into a proper system, and it's all fundamentally based around stretching and then
Yeah.
evolved more. So, it's very, very powerful.
Right. So, but I think from what you're saying here, Marcel, is that this whole principle of stretching isn't really just about if somebody's got an injury, then they need to stretch, or if they've got a pain, then they need to
No,
stretch to get rid of it. That it's a far more fundamental thing than just dealing with an injury, isn't it?
correct. It is as important
Mm,
and as accessible as exercise.
right.
So
Yeah.
what I mean by that is that if anyone is thinking to start being more physical, you can
Yeah.
literally start just by exercising, stretching.
Right. Yeah.
So if you're a larger person or an older person, but you're worried about exercising outside, maybe going for a jog or a run or a swim, and you're worried about that, start by stretching. It is a
Right.
fantastic way to lead into and build up to perhaps then increasing the exercise levels.
Right. Yeah. And
So it
I
can
I
be a
was
fundamental.
I was also thinking as well, that there's someone that we know recently had a fall, and they've got their hand in a cast, the plaster cast. I think it
Mhm.
was damage at the wrist, fracture at the wrist.
Mhm.
Now, when that plaster cast comes off, are there things this
Yeah.
person should be doing in terms of getting the muscle movement back, and
Yeah.
what should be happening in that kind of situation?
Absolutely. So, what I try to recommend as much as possible, if you've been in a cast, you've been effectively completely immobilized.
Yes.
So, what you want to do even before the cast comes off is maintain your muscle integrity within what you can do in that cast. So,
Right,
for
okay,
example, let's say the wrist is or the whole forearm is encased.
sure.
You can still do this.
Right, okay.
So if you do that, you're going to be maintaining the tendons and muscles inside there. If you don't use the hand at all of this, which is where your muscles, few muscles in the hand, it's all here.
Right,
So if you don't use that hand at all, you're going to lose any strength, and you have to start from scratch because, of
right,
course, you're going to want to use your hand. So you're going to have to start from scratch. So before the cast comes off, you start to do things like this. And what you do is that you don't just do opening and closing, you then use resistance. So it might be that we have a ball in the hand, and then we do
right.
this.
Yeah,
And then it might be that we build up to it and we use something like this, which is a donut squeezer. And this one is 50 pounds, and we squeeze
right,
it. And so what that's going to do is obviously start to utilize these muscles even more. Then what we can do is change the angle, and that changes the stress. If we can do that, we can change the stress even more. So there's lots of different things we can do in order to exercise and use those muscles even before. Now, obviously, pain and tolerance has to be taken into account,
sure.
but absolutely using it is very important. Once the cast comes off, the first thing you're going to want to do is wash it because it will be gross. But after that, then you're going to want to utilize the muscles even more
Yeah.
and return range of motion. If it's a broken wrist, movement through the wrist is going to be really limited at the beginning. But what you want to do is get that work every day to get movement back. So you put a little light weight in your hand and isolate the movement up and down, and you just do it again and again and again. And over
Right.
time, the range of motion will return. And this is linear. This is just in a straight line. Then we can make it more complicated, doing things like rotations through the wrist. And that's going to be more painful and more difficult, but eventually you want that mobility to return. So then we start to do
Right.
things like that.
Yeah.
Then we build up to being able to hold heavier things. So you want to build up to holding a slightly heavier weight and keeping that resistance and maybe using other muscles in the arm. And that's going to start to build up, because then we start, holding a kettle. One of the hardest things to do when you've broken your wrist is to hold a kettle with water in it safely and pour it out. That's a real measure of where you are, because it can be very
Right.
uncomfortable for quite a long time.
Yeah. And I guess, well, it's not going to be quite the same, but if somebody's had a plaster or some kind of cast on their ankle or whatever, there's going to be a similar process. Although you might not be able to grasp a tennis ball with your toes, but
Actually, you know what you do grasp? You grasp tissue. That's one
right.
of the
Okay.
exercises, is to grasp tissue with your toes in
Right.
order to get them active again. And that works really, really well. And you
Okay.
actually have to try and pick it up and so on. I use exercises with sand or wet sand, things like that. So yeah, absolutely. And then of course it's about loading the ankle and getting the movement back. But the same principle applies, in that you're going to want to use the muscle in the back of the leg, the calf muscle in this case,
Yes.
and the soleus, to keep that muscle as strong as you can, even whilst it's immobilized, if you can. And that's where I use things like electrotherapy as well, but that's another topic
Okay. Yeah. That's maybe for another day, Marcel.
for another day.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, you've talked about the 6 forms of stretching, and I'm not gonna say that I remember them, but I have written them down.
That's okay. Good.
So we've got dynamic and static, we've got ballistic, PNF, passive, and active. So
Yes.
those are the 6 forms of stretching.
Those are the
Right,
6 ones. And the ones that our listeners are most interested in are going to be static and dynamic. Those are the ones that really
okay.
are important for them.
So if people are gonna take sort of one main message away, um, from today, and they're not gonna be going to see a physical therapist
Yep.
like yourself, with a specific problem,
Yep.
just give us a sum up of the dynamic and static and things that people can sort of just start doing today on
Yep.
their own by
Yep.
themselves.
No problem. So you can spend 5 minutes a day doing a series of 4 to 6 stretches of the major muscle groups, and it could change your life forever.
Right.
And the major muscle groups that I would recommend are your quadricep muscles, the muscles at the front of your thighs, your hamstrings, the muscles at the top back side of your thighs, your lower back,
Right.
your abdominals, your chest, and your upper back.
Right.
And there's literally 4 to 6 major stretches that you could do, which actually what I'm going to do, if our listeners are interested, I'm going to publish a video on my YouTube channel,
Yeah.
where this will also be going out, where I will demonstrate those fundamental exercises that can be done every day if you want to, and then build it up from there. So if people
Yeah.
are interested in that, put a comment below this video or message directly, and I will do that.
Yeah, and if people want to catch up with your YouTube channel, but because you
Yep.
do a lot of stuff that's very visual,
Yes.
about exercises and dealing with specific problems. Uh,
Yep.
how do they find your YouTube channel,
So on
Marcel?
YouTube, if you type into the search window "Strong for Life Physical Therapy," you should find my logo, and there you'll find all my videos, which
Yeah,
are very useful. I'm doing quite a lot of daily submissions as well, which are called not reels. They're not reels on there, but shorts. Sorry, shorts on
yeah,
YouTube, which are just very useful single exercise recommendations that are very, very useful and proving to be quite popular as well. So,
Yeah,
but follow me for all the main videos and stuff.
and these are not things that require masses of equipment, are they? They're things that most of us
None,
could do at home quite
none,
easily just with what
absolutely.
we already have.
That's right. Most of them are body weight activities or a little bit of equipment, but
Yeah.
nothing major. Yep, absolutely.
Marcel, you've given us a lot to think about, and
I
I
hope so.
I I will make a commitment. I only managed about 20 days or 21 days on my cold showers, but I will
Right.
make a commitment to doing some stretching stuff every day because
Good.
I think I do it naturally, but I think it's better to sort of do it consciously, to say,
Yes.
right, I'm going to be doing this for the next few minutes.
Consciously and actively,
Yeah.
absolutely, and it will make a big difference, absolutely. And if you need a stretch, you need to see the stretch video, I can create that for you. Obviously, you can obviously search for one yourself that you prefer,
Yeah.
but I'm very happy to publish something like that as well that you can follow, certainly for the first
Perfect.
30 days.
Yeah, and we can put a link into that in the description
Great. Okay,
in this video. Okay,
brilliant.
Marcel, thank you so much. It's a
You're
pleasure
so
as
welcome.
always to talk with you,
Awesome.
and we'll see you maybe at the end of February. Are
I
you
hope
up?
so. Yep, absolutely. We'll do it again. Thank you so much for your
Okay,
time.
thank you
Thanks,
so
Paul.
much, Marcel. Perfect.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.